Donald Trump is back with a bold move, and if you're from one of these 10 countries, your stay in America could be over. Deportations are rising fast, and the list might just shock you. Is your country on it? Stick around. You need to see this. We're talking about hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of people living, working, and raising families here, who now face the very real threat of being uprooted and sent back to countries many of them haven't seen in decades. Over the next few minutes, we're going to take a hard look at 10 countries bearing the brunt of this policy shift. 10 countries whose citizens are caught in a web of legal limbo and political maneuvering. We'll hear their stories, examine the facts, and try to understand the human cost of these sweeping changes. Let's start with Mexico, shall we? It's practically become synonymous with the immigration debate in this country, thanks in no small part to a certain someone's obsession with building, well, you know. But here's the thing, focusing solely on the physical border ignores the millions of Mexican immigrants who've built lives here, many of whom are here legally. These are people woven into the very fabric of American society, and yet, under the current administration, even those with legal status are finding themselves navigating a bureaucratic nightmare, facing increased scrutiny, and living with the constant fear of deportation. Take, for instance, the Garcia family. Maria, a nurse at a local hospital, and Jose, a construction worker, have been living in the U.S. for over 20 years. They have 3 children, all born in the U.S., and pay their taxes diligently. Yet, a minor paperwork error from years ago has put them on ICE's radar, throwing their lives into turmoil. Next, we turn our attention to El Salvador, a country grappling with rampant gang violence and poverty. Imagine, if you will, fleeing your home because staying means risking your life and the lives of your children. That's the reality for many Salvadorans who make the treacherous journey north, seeking safety and a better future. But instead of finding refuge, they often encounter a different kind of danger, a hostile immigration system that views them with suspicion rather than compassion. The Trump administration argues that these migrants are a drain on resources, a threat to national security. Remember the story of Carmen, a young mother who fled El Salvador with her 2 daughters after her husband was murdered by gang members? She spent months in detention, separated from her children, before finally being granted asylum. Her ordeal, while harrowing, is sadly not an isolated incident. Our journey takes us now to Guatemala, a country grappling with poverty, corruption, and the legacy of a brutal civil war. Many Guatemalans seeking refuge in the United States are fleeing economic hardship, unable to provide for their families back home. Others are escaping violence and persecution, hoping for a chance at a safer life. Yet, they are often met with skepticism and hostility, their stories dismissed as fabrications. The Trump administration's crackdown on asylum seekers has made it even more difficult for Guatemalans to find safety and protection in the United States. Next, we have Honduras, a country in crisis. Honduras, a nation plagued by gang violence, political instability, and natural disasters, presents another tragic case study in the human cost of these deportation policies. Imagine living in a place where extortion is commonplace, where gangs control entire neighborhoods, where simply walking down the street can be a life-or-death gamble. That's the reality for millions of Hondurans, a reality they're desperately trying to escape. But the Trump administration's response has been to essentially slam the door shut, arguing that these asylum seekers are simply economic migrants looking for a handout. One particularly egregious example of this policy in action is the case of the Flores family. After their son witnessed a gang murder, they fled to the United States, seeking asylum. Despite having a credible fear of persecution, they were deported back to Honduras, where, tragically, their son was killed just weeks later. Next up, Haiti, recovering from disaster, facing deportation. Haiti, a nation still reeling from the devastating 2010 earthquake and subsequent cholera outbreak, faces a particularly cruel twist of fate. Just as Haitians were beginning to rebuild their lives, the Trump administration announced the end of temporary protected status, or TPS, for Haitians living in the United States. This move, roundly condemned by human rights groups and even some Republican lawmakers, puts nearly 60,000 Haitians at risk of deportation. Many of these individuals have been living in the United States for decades, contributing to the economy, raising families, and becoming integral members of their communities. Take, for example, the story of Marie, a nurse who came to the United States after the earthquake. She's been working tirelessly on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic, risking her own health to care for others. Next we have Nicaragua, from revolution to repression. Nicaragua, once a symbol of revolutionary hope, has descended into authoritarian rule under President Daniel Ortega. The government's brutal crackdown on dissent, its attacks on journalists and human rights activists, have forced many Nicaraguans to flee their homeland in search of safety. Yet, their pleas for asylum are often met with skepticism by the Trump administration, which seems more interested in cozying up to dictators than offering refuge to those fleeing persecution. Consider the case of Juan, a student activist who fled Nicaragua after receiving death threats for his role in anti-government protests. He arrived in the United States seeking asylum, hoping to continue his education and build a better future. However, his application was denied, and he now faces the very real possibility of being deported back to Nicaragua, where he fears for his life. His story, like so many others, highlights the plight of Nicaraguan asylum seekers caught in the crosshairs of U.S. immigration policy. Next up, Sudan, a nation ravaged by civil war, genocide, and political instability, presents another tragic example of the human cost of deportation. After decades of conflict, Sudan is finally taking tentative steps towards peace and democracy. Yet, the Trump administration's decision to end temporary protected status for Sudanese nationals threatens to send thousands back to a country still grappling with the legacy of violence and displacement. Many of these individuals fled Sudan to escape persecution, torture, and even death. Take, for instance, the story of Fatima, a mother of 3 who fled Sudan after her husband was killed in the Darfur genocide. She came to the United States seeking safety and a better future for her children. Next is Nepal, a country still recovering from the devastating 2015 earthquake, faces a unique set of challenges. The earthquake, which killed nearly 9,000 people and displaced millions more, exposed the country's vulnerability to natural disasters and its limited capacity to cope with such shocks. While the Nepali people have shown incredible resilience in the face of adversity, the Trump administration's decision to end TPS for Nepalese nationals threatens to undermine their recovery efforts. Many TPS holders send remittances back home, providing a vital lifeline to families struggling to rebuild their lives. Consider the case of Vishnu, a carpenter who came to the U.S. after the earthquake destroyed his home and livelihood. He's been working hard to support his family back in Nepal, sending money every month to help them rebuild their lives. However, with the end of TPS, he faces the agonizing prospect of leaving his job, his community, and his dreams behind. Up next, Syria, a nation ravaged by civil war and a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions, presents perhaps the most morally compelling case against deportation. The Syrian conflict, now in its 10th year, has claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands of people and displaced millions more, creating the worst refugee crisis since World War II. Yet, despite the ongoing violence and humanitarian catastrophe, the Trump administration has shown a callous disregard for the plight of Syrian refugees, enacting policies that make it exceedingly difficult for them to find safety and refuge in the United States. Take, for example, the story of Ahmed, a doctor who fled Aleppo after his hospital was bombed. He arrived in the United States with his family, hoping to rebuild their lives and contribute their skills to their new community. However, their asylum application was denied, and they now face the terrifying prospect of being deported back to a war zone. Next we have Yemen, a nation ravaged by civil war, famine, and a humanitarian crisis of unimaginable proportions, stands as a stark reminder of the human cost of indifference. The conflict in Yemen, often described as the world's worst humanitarian crisis, has created a living hell for millions of innocent civilians. Bombed hospitals, starving children, a cholera outbreak of unprecedented scale. These are just a few of the horrors that have become tragically commonplace in Yemen. Yet, despite the ongoing catastrophe, the Trump administration has shown little compassion for Yemeni asylum seekers, enacting policies that make it nearly impossible for them to find safety and refuge in the United States. Consider the case of Amina, a mother of 4 who fled Yemen after her home was destroyed in a bombing raid. She arrived in the United States with her children, desperate for safety and a chance at a normal life. However, their asylum application was rejected, and they now face the unimaginable prospect of being deported back to a war zone. So there you have it, a glimpse into the lives of just a few of the countless individuals and families facing deportation under the Trump administration's draconian immigration policies. These aren't just statistics, they're human beings with hopes, dreams, and fears, just like you and me. If you believe in fair treatment for all immigrants, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Your voice can make a difference.